Welcome to Canada's Court, and we've got a very special episode today. We are taking a look at Canada basketball following what has been described as a pretty disappointing Olympics. Now, we've had a chance to decompress, and it's time to take stock of what happened and look a little bit ahead to the future. But I certainly can't do that on my own. In fact, I've called in a bit of a dream team to help us go through it all. And here's the lineup. Coach O was our guide for the Olympic Games from start to finish. He's the host of the Projects 365 podcast. We've also got Chelsea Leite. She is the editor-in-chief of the Raptors HQ. And we've also got Will Liu, the host of the Hello and Welcome podcast. Let's go around the table here with a bit of a simple question. But overall, on a scale from 1 to 10, how would you rate the showing by Canada basketball at the 2024 Olympics? Coach O, why don't you lead us off here?
I'm definitely going to say that in terms of me being in my entourage, right? I think this is the most that people have talked about basketball as a country in general. So for me, in terms of excitement, it was definitely up there, definitely at a 9 or 10. Little disappointment obviously came with Canada not being able to, win and dominate in every department. But I do believe that in terms of excitement, this was a pretty exciting Olympics for the future of what we have going in this country for basketball.
That's fair. Will, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, it was a huge accomplishment to get all three teams to the Olympics. I think there was some expectation to varying degrees that they could medal or at least come away with 1 or 2 medals here or there. I think especially given the fact that the 3x3 team was so close, one win on the last day could have changed everything. Given the fact that the women went 0-3 and just looked completely discombobulated the entire time. And then on the men's side, which was definitely the most hyped team, they ran into a French team that was just BSing all tournament and then decided to get it all together for one game, and it made some key adjustments, and Canada unfortunately got caught up in that. Also, they got just destroyed coming out the gate, and I think that they just couldn't recover. So yeah, I mean, when you look back at it, like, you would be pretty disappointed. Like, it's easy 8 out of 10 at least.
Chelsea, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to be disappointed when you have like 3 really good teams competing, and I would have loved to see them compete for longer, but like Will was saying, like the 3x3 team made it so far, and we've been able to watch the women's team in the past few Olympics, so it was nice to see them back, as much as the result we wish would have been better. But then just seeing the men's team make that comeback to the Olympics and, just have all that rich history surrounding the team, and they did make it pretty far. I mean, 3-0 in the group is a huge accomplishment, and getting to the quarterfinals, I mean, they weren't even at the last however many Olympics, right? So it's just nice to be in this new era where it's kind of an expectation now that Canada is a presence in these tournaments. So yeah, hype was up there. I'd say like 7-8 as well.
Wow, you guys were way more positive than I expected. I think if I had asked this like a week and a half ago, the answers would have been a little bit different. But I'm glad we've got some. We've been able to reflect, and it's looking good. Let's take a look and start with the men's team first. As most people know, Canada went 3-0 in the group stage, picking up wins against Greece, Spain, and Australia, and then fell to France in the quarterfinals. Because of the record, they finished 5th. Will, I'm going to start with you on this one. Do you feel at least a little bit better, given that, what as you mentioned, we saw France just kind of take it to a whole nother level in the playoff round? Does it make you feel a little bit better now, looking back on it, about how Canada did there?
Yeah, a little bit better. I mean, I think at the day that it happened, it was very hard to accept just like what was happening. It was like, wow, look at this one-off game by Yershon Yabusele or like Matthias Lesor. I think he had like 14 points on 2 made buckets. Obviously, a lot of free throws involved on that front. Isaiah Cordigny started that game off super hot, gave France a lot of momentum, and obviously they rode that out for the majority of the game. But yeah, I mean, I think France really did over the course of the tournament showcase at least that they did have the second most talent, I think, going into the tournament. And it took a while for the coach to sort of figure out what was the best configuration, but he came to the brave decision that, like, look, Rudy Gobert, especially given the way that teams were guarding France, especially given the way that Rudy couldn't really score on post-ups, and also his mobility on defense, I just felt like they had too much rim protection. I never really felt like team could have too much rim protection. It was like Wemby could do it, and then the rest of the team could really zone up. They could play those two forwards together with Lasort and Yabusele, and then they could play a lot of zone. And they did a really good job of just cutting off driving lanes. Like that was their success against Canada, against Germany, and ultimately they didn't get it done against USA. But even their zone coverages really gave USA a lot of issues too. So yeah, I mean, I think in hindsight, like you can look at that game and think about, okay, France was just better than what they had looked going into just the first game of the quarterfinals. But still, at the same time, it's just like, damn, I think for, when you lose, you get to see a lot more of like what doesn't work for Canada. And when you look back at it, it's like, it's not like there wasn't a way they could have won that game, right? Like a healthy Jamal Murray would have made a huge difference pretty much all tournament, but especially in that game. And if they had just figured out one or two other things in terms of just like who is going to contribute off the bench, because when you look back at that game, they got absolutely nothing off the bench. They couldn't really figure out their front court rotations. And yeah, Shea was excellent. RJ was efficient in the moments that he got chances, but otherwise, it just felt like that team didn't fully figure itself out the way that they looked, even though group stage, everything was moving great. So it's still disappointing for me.
Yeah, I agree with Will too. And I think one of the biggest things that glared for me was the fact that, Canada again couldn't figure out their front court rotation, but are just like missing some really strong big guys where I feel like that's like the trend these days around the world. I mean, you have Wemby, Team USA is always going to be stacked with big men, but like you have all these teams who have these big presence people in the NBA, and Canada just doesn't have that. All of, the guys that we have that are like that guy are guards. So, or RJ, who's, a forward. So I think just like figuring out how to fill that gap before the next big tournament, I think is huge, because these teams are just developing more of these super tall, super, players that can not only play in the post, but also play like, Wemby's going to turn into a very well-rounded player. So yeah, I think that was something that just glared out for me in terms of this Canada roster.
It definitely was interesting. You guys both hit on it, because I think we all had identified that Canada's weakness was going to be how do they guard the interior? That was going to be the number one thing. And it just seemed like we said that if there's somebody who is willing to be physical for more than half the game, not in spot minutes, but for the majority of the game, they're going to give us a lot of issues. And that's what ended up happening, right? Like you're looking at France being willing to be physical every single time down. It puts a lot of pressure on a team that switches a lot and has to, front the post and make sure that on the skip pass, you're rotating back in front of bigs. Sorry. So, I agree 100%.
Well, that kind of brings me to my next question: is the players that weren't there? Obviously, no Corey Joseph, no Andrew Wiggins. I don't think either of those guys would have made too big of an impact, especially in that game. I do wonder about Zach Edey, though. Obviously, he's so young; he hasn't played in the NBA yet, and it's totally reasonable that he wasn't wasn't there for Canada. You gotta get that money. You gotta play in the pros, but you got to wonder if maybe that's an option for Canada. He certainly has shown development, between this season and last season at the college end, and if he can be a productive player, I don't think he's going to be an MVP of a team, but it could answer those kind of questions of, is a guy like Yabusele going to be able to push around Zach Edey? Probably not as much, though. You're maybe giving up elsewhere on that one. Any thoughts on that? Do you think that Zach Edey would have made a difference?
I think it would have helped. Every single game, it was like Jordy having to figure out which big is going to work in which situation, and there was never like a go-to solution. Dwight Powell was sort of always in risk of fouling out, and that was like half of, I felt like Dan Schulman's commentary was like, oh, Dwight Powell's got 2 fouls. You got to watch out here. It's a FIBA game. You only get 5 in a 40-minute game. I'm like, damn, I'm constantly stressed and worried about that. And then off the bench, it was like they couldn't really find any minutes for Kelly at all. And quite frankly, Kelly just never looked comfortable, which is very strange. Kelly has been really good for this program, but quite frankly, this whole run, he just didn't look productive at all, which concerns me as a Raptor fan. And then Kem Birch, which it was a great comeback story to see him back out there. And I thought probably, when you look back at it, probably Canada's best backup big. But we also know that Kem is obviously sort of a spot utility guy, ideally your third big. And then Trey Lyles, I don't know, just basically the same situation as Kelly, just with less experience. So yeah, I mean, I think Zach would have helped in that front. I think for me, like when you look back at that France game, like you needed a secondary creator, I think, more than anything else. Like Shea was really giving it his all. Shea didn't really come out that strong to begin with, but second, third, fourth quarter, he was excellent. Canada obviously got it down to like a one possession game, but you just needed, another guy, because I feel like Shea was going to gas out if he had to carry the whole time. RJ kind of was that for some degree, but they didn't really, like, RJ never ran like one or two pick and rolls, it feels like, per game. They were mostly having him like attack off the catch and either catch and shoot or slash to the rim or play in transition. Those aren't necessarily the type of plays where you're giving the guy the ball and giving him the chance to sort of initiate offense. That's where Jamal needed to be there, or somebody else. And I don't know necessarily if Zach would have been that type of person. You look at, for example, what France ultimately did was they almost played box and one at times against Shea. I mean, Shea saw that against Spain, but a lot of zone as well. All that's designed so that Shea can't touch the paint and they can't start those swing actions that led Canada to be really efficient in the group stages. So I don't know. For me, like, yeah, the big definitely hurts for sure, but I think they needed a secondary creator, and they just never had that in the moment that it mattered the most.
One of the other things that I heard, Will, you talk about on your podcast was the kind of, as you look to fill a couple of these needs, should Canada's national team consider naturalizing players? I mean, lots of teams do it. The U.S. did a pretty big one in getting Embiid, which, rich get richer. That was tough to watch. Coach O, do you think that that's something Canada basketball should look into in kind of terms of finding someone who's maybe got at least some Canadian connections, maybe played for the Raptors for a long time? I don't know, but could come in and kind of make a difference for this program going forward?
It could definitely help. But I think if you're looking at it from the outside, it's almost like, a Band-Aid, like kind of like a temporary kind of solution. I think this is an organization that prides itself on its player development and the retention of player, the more that it could get people to commit to something. Because the work that Canada basketball does, they start this at the middle school level, right? So I do think there's a lot of belief that there will be able to bounce back from this. But I do believe also there is even more confidence that the next crop of kids is going to be able to develop just as big and just as skilled as the next one.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely I'm forgetting this kid's name now, like right in the moment, but isn't there like a 7 foot something kid who's coming up for Canada? Get that kid in the gym, and hopefully in a couple of years we'll be able to use him.
Yeah, Olivier Rio, right? It's Olivier Rio.
Yeah. Yes, that's it.
Going to Florida. I think he's 18 years old, 7'7" or 7'9". He's got some hype, but I think he's kind of pretty young to be going to university. I don't know if he's someone Canada's got their eye on, but I mean, hey, if you can develop someone who's 7'9", you could be in good shape.
No, I think for me too is like, look, from a team building standpoint, of course, having the option, this is essentially like the national team version of free agency. Having the option of signing someone in free agency is obviously better than not having the option of having someone to sign in free agency. And we all know that, like, when you look at this core, they took 4 bigs, right? Dwight Powell, Kelly Olynyk, Kem Birch, all 3 of those guys are in their 30s, and Trey Lyles is like going to be 30 if he's ever back on the national program for the World Cup in 27 or for the Olympics in 28. So, yeah, I mean, there's a real chance you got to bring in 4 new bigs. So, like, yeah, I think Zach, probably you can pencil him in for sure. If he's healthy and available on contracts, blah, blah, blah. But I think, the other question the program's got to ask itself is, like, what is the purpose of the program? Is it to win as many medals and to advance at the highest level no matter what? Or is it to showcase and grow the talent in Canada? If that's the case, then I actually I would prefer if they didn't, quite frankly. Like, I honestly, I would be okay losing on our own merits, knowing that this is sort of the reality of most national team programs. Like, you look at France, why did they lose at the end? They didn't have good enough guard play. And it's like, well, if they had Canada's guards, they probably beat USA. That's not what it's about. You know what I mean? Like, it's really about showcasing your country, and, you know, it's not necessarily a charity, but at the same time, it is a, you know, it's the purpose of the program for me is to develop and foster and grow the sport of basketball. And going out there and signing somebody, I don't know, it does kind of cut against that to some degree for me. But then again, if you want to win, then, like, yeah, of course free agency is the best option, you know?
Yeah, that is a question. It's actually, you're right. It's a lot more philosophical than I initially imagined it. But it almost, I think it almost depends on the player, right? Like if you've got someone who's, I guess Pascal Siakam's no longer on the Raptors. I know you guys mentioned them on Hello and Welcome, but like if you have a guy like that who's played for the Raptors for a long time, he's basically in a lot of ways like Joel Embiid. I know a lot of shade was thrown in his direction for choosing USA, but it is fair to say that like he's lived now his adult life completely in the United States, and I can see why you consider yourself American in that respect. So there is something to that, but it does on the USA side, it just does seem a little off. Anyway, let's move on to the women's team now. Canada lost a blowout against France, and then two closer games against Nigeria and Australia. Meaning they didn't make the playoff round. Chelsea, I'll start with you. They came in ranked 5th in the country. Were you surprised with kind of how they performed in this tournament?
Yes and no. I think, just like the men's program, just like any, program, obviously going into it, you knew that there were some shortcomings on the roster, and that's just how, like Will was saying, national programs work. And I think similarly to what Will was saying before about the men's team, the women's team was just missing like secondary offense. They were missing, and I mean, there's a lot in these games that just didn't look like this roster. There were so many times where I was looking at Kayla Alexander's, performances and thinking like she usually does not perform like this. She usually is like a walking double-double. So it was just like a mix of bad days, but also how many of those can you have in a row? And then also just needing some more offense on this roster. You had Bridget Carlton, who was kind of putting the team on her back, and that's great. But then you had no one else kind of like helping her out. One guard can't win a basketball game, right? So very curious. They have some great talent coming down the line. I think we're kind of maybe in an opposite path in the men's team where most of the talent is on the younger side, and we're going to start pushing them in on the women's side, or the men's side, it's, kind of leaning the other way. But yeah, I mean, I was surprised. I was disappointed. Obviously, I have a lot of like hope in what this team can do, and there's a lot of great players. It's just, I think something about the way that the roster was constructed and the way that the lineups were kind of going out, and then, just those individual day-to-day performances that, it didn't all come together in the end, which sucks because you obviously want them to succeed. But yeah, it's we're kind of in a changing era for the women's side in particular. So it's interesting to think about where they'll be in the next tournament.
Yeah, I mean, those games for the women, like I felt really bad for them, the players individually, because they didn't feel like a team collectively. Lots of times where it just felt like they weren't organized offensively. They couldn't really get into their sets. They had like the lasting memory for me, unfortunately, for this team was like that second quarter they had against France where they only had 2 points. And it was like, wow, like every other possession was a turnover, and they couldn't get the ball past half. They couldn't get into their offense. Kind of had similar issues against Nigeria, although Nigeria was just really, really good defensively, and they pressured and they were physical. And I thought that, a lot of teams struggle with that, quite frankly, not just Canada, but still, they just didn't necessarily look like themselves. So, like, no player really, to Chelsea's point, was really able to shine. Bridget was probably, to me, the best player, but, I thought we would see more from Kia, maybe a little bit more from Natalie as well. But at the same time, I thought for me, what was most intriguing was just getting a chance to look at the younger prospects who can come up. And I didn't think they really found a role at all for Leah Edwards in this one. Like, maybe, like, I felt like she really, number one, could have started, but number two, probably could have been featured more in the offense. But then again, like, it's hard to judge when half the time they couldn't even get into an offense, right? And then when you have that many live ball turnovers, you're basically always giving up transition layups. So Yeah, it was tough. I think honestly, a lot of changes could be coming both personnel and coaching on that front, and hopefully they're able to sort of just rebuild back up to the point where they've been in the past.
Yeah, it's so interesting because they've been the kind of the more stable presence on the national level for Canada. So with that, you kind of there is kind of these, whether fair or not, more expectations, because for the men's team there was lots of hype, but you're like, okay, this is their first time here. Where for a lot of the women's team, they've been there multiple times. So that was really interesting to see. Coach O, what do you think of the kind of, we talked about it a little bit already, but the lineup decisions from Coach Victor LaPena that he made? What do you kind of make of the kind of route he went there?
Yeah, Will, you mentioned a bit of it. Like, I think, um, being comfortable in your role, I think it's such a big thing in basketball, especially in this kind of competition where you don't really have that much time to practice and you got to figure stuff out on the fly. So if you're not figuring it out like in the first 3 Olympic Games that you have, well, guess what? You're figuring it out on the big stage, So I think this was kind of like one of those situations, right? Because like you almost felt at times that it was almost like 2 different units that were on the court at different times of play. You notice that when Shea Colley was on, it was really run the offense, try to initiate it, pass on the wing. The other team started picking up on that. They started pressuring up, so it was hard for us to get the offense going. But then when you get Sammy Hill, who gets in, listen, Sammy from this tournament, Sammy's one of the players that, hey, I'm tipping my hat off to.
Yeah, she's a
because
dog.
you felt like Sammy. You felt like she was affecting the game both ways, where she was pressuring up, picking up full court, but she was also like putting a lot of pressure on the defense and kind of keeping them off balance in a way, because it wasn't just run the offense. They started over pressuring. She was blowing past defenders, right? So I think like it's more like that kind of balance. But again, to echo what you said, what Chelsea and Will said, I think this was also an opportunity for the younger players, right? You're looking at this roster. I mean, we had Silas Swords, who's like 18 years old, right? Casson Prosper is 19. And then we have Letitia Mihir, who I thought was really good. I think she had a game where she had the most rebounds in a single game for one of the Canadian women's team. And even like Aaliyah Edwards, 22, right? So it's like you have a lot of prospects, but I think that's kind of what it was. And it was more about like, let's rely on the comfortability that we have from all the players that have been there. But I do think like there had to be almost of a balance of, yes, we're going to be structured, but we got to let those young players kind of be unstructured at certain times and see what happens.
So I wonder if, it's kind of been a bit of a rough 2024 for the women's team because the Olympic qualifiers were messy in their own way. And then you have this performance. Do you think, Will, you kind of mentioned it there, but do any of you think there's going to be any kind of changes going forward to personnel? I mean, like they were able to, I guess you could rely on the fact that, we do have all these young players who just got experience, and maybe, in 2 years, 3 years, whenever you're doing World Cup and then Olympics, it could be different, or is there kind of bigger changes that need to happen?
I mean, I think some players are just naturally aging out, right? Like obviously Natalie Chan was done with, just the Olympics, and salute to her. She was excellent. It was really emotional seeing her talk about her experiences and how this was the last one for her. I think that maybe, I think Kayla could probably still play one more time in the Olympics, but I think you just have to bite the bullet eventually and like turn it over, to the younger players. And I think that the 4 young players that coach mentioned, like, I feel like those 4 could just be future starters for this team for a long time. And the more experience that they get playing together, I think, the better, quite frankly, for me. But I think it might also help to get a different coach in there. I mean, like, I don't know. It's hard for me to say definitively because realistically, I've seen Victor coach not that many times. It's not like, when you watch like Nick Nurse in Toronto and you're like, okay, I've seen him for 5 years for like 100 games every year. I'm like, okay, I know what he's going to do. But just somebody who can kind of be young and grow with the group, I wouldn't mind if they went back to a Canadian coach too as well. Again, going back to the sort of the purpose of the program, I think with all things being equal, I prefer for the program to be Canadian. Yeah, but just some fresh ideas. I think if you're looking at that young core as a group, I think probably shooting is at a premium, right? Like if we're talking about like for the starters being Silas Swords or Cassandra Prosper, Letitia, stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, aside from that, it's just the togetherness of the group, and I guess we'll have time to see them sort of build up.
Yeah, I agree as well. Like, I think it's like, especially when you think about the how much change will be going on in the next 4 years. I mean, like Aaliyah just got into the pros. Silas Swords went to prom like 2 weeks ago. Like, like she is literally hasn't even played a single college game and was at the Olympics. Like, that's nuts. And I followed her senior year, actually. She went to high school in Long Island and was an All-American and was just like, when you see her play, like, in her kind of element, I guess. Like, I watched her play in the All-American game, and the way that she's able to drive and the way that she kind of, she's really fast. She's good at shooting. She has all these skills that obviously you didn't see at this level because, one, she wasn't getting that many minutes, and two, like Will said, they couldn't really get into an offense. But that's like, she's going to improve so much, and I have so much hope for her, so much hope for her and Aaliyah Edwards as like a unit in and themselves. I mean, Bridget Carlton has been improving over the past like 2-ish years and will definitely, I think, be at the next Olympics, given if she's healthy or not. So yeah, I think there's just like a lot of upside to look at. And, I saw someone mention like this Canada basketball team on the med side was meant to be good now, but where I think the women are meant to be good in like 2028. So yeah, I think I just wanted to like give the silent perspective. I'm like in on her, and I think that that's going to be a really exciting one to watch, especially when you add in Aaliyah Edwards and how good we saw her in college with Paige Beckers with that very strong guard presence and how she's able to like operate in a duo like that. So yeah, I think once they both get a little bit more experience, that's going to be a great combo to watch.
And Chelsea, you make a good point because in high school, right, a lot of creativity, right? You can explore things, and that's where you're able to see certain players excel and just be able to have, a bit more leeway to explore certain skill sets. You kind of felt that when it got on that stage, you're playing with older players. It almost felt like you're hesitant a bit because you have to fill in a role and you don't want to step on toes, right? So it's like that's the balance where I think there should have been maybe a bit of time for freedom, a bit, just to see what you get, because momentum's a real thing in basketball. It's a real thing.
For sure. Yeah, and you could see, like, if you watch Silas specifically in these games where she did get a bit of those minutes, and even in the qualifying tournament as well, like, you could see she was thinking about doing stuff, but then ultimately would pass or do that because that was her role. She was meant to just kind of like get minutes, pass, be like a presence, and get some like real minutes with these players. So yeah, if she was just given kind of the green light to do her thing, I think we would have seen like glimpses of the future.
One of the things that, I've said this on the podcast a few times now, but that I really think speaks volumes is the fact that she was able to not just like be on the team and get minutes, but those minutes were minutes in games that they fully intended on winning, right? Like, it wasn't like, all right, here's 6 minutes at the end of the fourth quarter of a game we're up or down. And it was like, here, let's give you some real kind of important high stakes minutes. And she like you guys said, she had different challenges to work with, but yeah, I think that's definitely some positives to look forward to going forward. I think that's a really good point about the men's team being built to win now and this team being built to win in the future. And what's kind of gives them a bit of a an advantage in a way is that they do have a bit more of the balance that we're talking about the men's team not having. Like, we're thinking, oh man, what do we do about the center position? We need more. And they're even with the men's team, there are some kind of like creators waiting in the wings that could, help Canada in 4 years. But still missing that kind of big option there. But with the women's team, there's definitely more kind of balance, I feel like, to what their roster could look like. Now let's stop dwelling in the past. Let's look ahead to the future. Although we were looking at the future pretty hard on there. I shouldn't have read my script so clearly there. Let's let's go back to the men's team here. Actually, no, sorry. I wanted to go to the 3-on-3 team.
Mhm.
Chelsea, you kind of mentioned them off the top. Certainly not. They were definitely medal hopefuls going in, and would have been and were certainly disappointed with how things played out, and ending up in fourth. But really, I think like a huge statement for 3-on-3 basketball. And you know, I remember talking to Canada Basketball CEO Michael Bartlett about 3-on-3, and he was like, "Oh, we gotta get it played at like half times of basketball games and all that." And like I was like, "Yeah, I don't know," but I feel like there is some good momentum behind the 3-on-3 game now.
Yeah, I mean, that was a lot of people's introduction to the game. And I think with things, especially on the women's side, like there's so much talent on the women's side, but not really enough avenues for these players to go. And I think it's a really good avenue for players who maybe aren't making it on the 5-on-5 side to maybe try it out and see if they can, get some momentum over there. But it's a lot different than 5-on-5 when you actually start getting into the little things, and it's so fast, and it's so like you have to kind of watch it the whole time without like looking at your phone, or you're going to miss like 10 points. And like I get tired watching it. But I think what these programs have started to do over the past few years is take players and just put them on the 3-on-3 circuit and have them touring around the world and building momentum together as a team. And that's what Canada has been doing. You have these 4 players who have really great chemistry, who play well together, who kind of fit into like the standard 3-on-3. You need, versatility, but you also need size because everybody's playing every position kind of thing. And that is what helped them. And you saw, the USA struggled. They definitely like picked it up near the end, but my main critique with that team is that they didn't have any time together. And I was like, get these players who are on the cusp of making WNBA teams or, playing in Europe or kind of that situation to get on these 3-on-3 teams and build some development because it's growing really fast. I mean, there's going to be a new 3-on-3 league this winter for the women's side, Unrivaled. So yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how the game grows and, how teams strategize their rosters going into the next Olympics.
I've always liked 3-on-3 as a medium for myself to play basketball because it means I don't have to go to the other end of the court. I can kind of stay on one side. That's always nice. I thought it was really. I did a double take when I saw Jimmer Fredette playing for the USA men's team. That caught me off guard for a minute there.
Yeah. I mean, I think one way you could like supercharge the growth of the game is if you put more like recognizable players who have played in like WNBA or played in the NBA. I think obviously that's something that I think FIBA has like deliberately gone out of their way to say that like, no, this is a separate thing. And so you're not just going to see like the next one being LeBron, Steph, and I don't know, KD. Although honestly, I would love to see that.
That'd be a good team. That'd be a good team.
Let those guys retire, man. Let those guys do that one last time. Because I think a couple of things that was really interesting for me is just like to Chelsea's point, that looks way too exhausting to play. After made baskets, we're just taking the ball out and then we are kicking it out and then we are resetting and going. There's not even like a second to like catch your breath even a little bit. So I think there's interesting things that you can do there in terms of like just your floor balance and things like that. Maybe even like if you attack a mismatch, then the other team attacks your mismatch right back. Because there's not even time to reset your matchups like you would if you would, typically, I guess on 5-on-5, you take the ball out and you reset and everything like that. Yeah, and I think, the advantage of the game to me is just like everybody's got to be able to score in all the scenarios. So you need to be a complete player, whether that's on the defensive end. Obviously, that's probably the most important, but you need to be able to like, know how to post up and get a bucket. And you need to obviously have the 3-point shot on the outside, but specifically you're going to need to get it off the dribble for the most part as well. So yeah, it's I don't know. I think I just want to be more familiar and see the sort of how the tournament and how the people sort of shape up. But I did get really invested in this specific team on the women's side, and I was rooting for them really hard. And I think for them, they just got a little bit tired towards the end. I thought it was uncharacteristic. A lot of fouls against USA in the end there, which was just like, I thought they were going to win that game. They were more experienced or older, but just a couple of things really didn't go their way. But yeah, that team was for sure, medal worthy. So I think out of all the teams, like that was the one that was closest to getting the medal.
Yeah, I think the cruel part about that game too is that it's like sometimes it's just luck. Like sometimes you're in overtime and literally someone gets like Ryan Howard gets the ball and gets it in and that's it. Overtime's over, like sudden death. So it's cruel. I think it hurt a little bit more in the moment because I was like, oh my gosh, literally 30 seconds ago it looked like they were gonna win. So, the stakes in the moment are a lot. So I think that just makes it entertaining.
I've always wondered. I mean, Will, you joked about it, but it would be if I was one of those nations that probably not a great shot at like a gold medal, but I've got a couple like 2 or 3 really good players. It would be kind of interesting just to see like Jokic playing in the 3-on-3 basketball. It would be interesting, but I don't think that's going to happen.
The funniest thing is the first one of the matches I watched was on the men's side and was like maybe Lithuania versus like Latvia, and it was just like 3 bald guys who looked like they were 40, and I was just like, what is going on here? Like I had no idea who these people were, but yeah, I mean, I hope it's not necessarily just a retirement league, you know what I mean? Like there's literally the big 3 for that, but yeah, I would love to see one more farewell tour after how well Team USA pulled it off this time around.
Yeah, that was, I mean, we're getting back to the men's side now too, but it was, as much as I think a lot of people here in Canada were rooting against the USA, watching Steph Curry hit some of those shots he was hitting and play like that. That was special. Even me as a, I was rooting against the USA for sure, but that was special to watch for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, if you're a fan of basketball, like you appreciated those moments for sure.
Let's take a look at kind of the future of the men's team here. We alluded to it a bit, but I kind of want to go around the table and see, like, as we're preparing for, obviously, the World Cup becomes before the Olympics, but as we're preparing for this next version of what Team Canada is, what is maybe 1 or 2 players that you're thinking, I would really like to see them put on the Canadian jersey that maybe wasn't there this time around? Will, I'll start with you.
I think there's a couple of options, I think for me, Benedict Mathurin would be kind of really interesting. I think I see him as like a young player with a lot of flaws right now, so he's obviously got to polish those, and this is not a game where you have the room to sort of make a lot of errors, you know what I mean? But what I see the strengths of his games, like he's so physical, he's really tough, he's very tough on the offensive end. Like he is not afraid. I remember like even as a rookie, there's one game where like Raptors were playing the Pacers, whatever, and I think Jamal McGlure, might have like said some stuff to him. I mean, you know what? Likely suspect, quite frankly, if Jamal McGlure was doing some shit talking, and then Benedict Mathurin just like completely went off. He's not afraid to take any shot. Now, of course, shot selection is a thing, but he gets to the foul line a decent amount too. I just think that like in terms of a secondary creator, he has that ability, but of course he needs to make better reads, right? Like, is he going to pass, right? I think is a fair question, but I could totally see him as being like a guy coming off the bench that can like give you a lot of scoring. And to me, that'd be really interesting because I think like Nembhard, whether he's coming off the bench or starting in the future, is going to be a really, really good point guard for the national program. But I think a scorer in terms of someone who can really be aggressive and create their own off the bench, I think Benedict would really help on that front.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't get to see Zach Edey this time. I think we talked about it a little bit before, but just seeing not only how he develops on the international side, but with that 2 or 3 years of NBA experience, how much that impacts them on the other side. And we'll see how his rookie season goes and stuff like that. But I think he's at this really cool time now in his career where he can like build up a whole new skill set, and then that can kind of hopefully transfer over. And the next time we see him in a Canada jersey, this is like the best case scenario. He's kind of fills those gaps that we were talking about before that Canada's missing.
For me, it's going to have to be Shaedon Sharpe. I think you're looking at 49-inch vert, 7-foot wingspan. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you could go. But what's very interesting about Shaedon Sharpe is that he's in a situation in Portland where he has the ability to try some stuff and put stuff together, right? A lot of young players don't really get that opportunity. So I think that potentially may allow him to expand a bit more faster.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see kind of. It depends a lot on how players develop. It's fun to talk about all this stuff, but it will just kind of depend on like, will these guys kind of take those next steps? One of the guys I'm excited for is Leonard Miller. Obviously, he's not a big, but he's a guy who can play some small ball center, and he can rebound really well, and hopefully in a few years maybe space the floor a little bit better. I think there's some potential there, but that's another one where it's kind of a bit more of a deep cut. Like I'll see, if he can develop the right way, there's certainly potential there. Then of course there's also the women's side. We talked a lot about Silas Swords. Chelsea, I'll start with you. Is there anybody else that you're kind of really looking forward to seeing play for the national team in the next few years?
Yeah, I think another exciting prospect is Toby Fournier. I think she's just starting college as well and is really tall and can dunk. I think that's like the thing that made her go viral. And, going to a program like Duke where she's going to get a lot of really good playing time against a lot of really good teams, a lot of future WNBA prospects, and she might be one of them. So I think that, in this cycle where we're saying goodbye to players like Natalie Achonwa and, we're kind of up in the air about Kayla Alexander's future, but eventually I think Toby's really going to be in the mix and be able to hopefully, fill that gap that we're going to, start missing out on when you take Natalie out of the picture. And she just is exciting. She kind of reminds me, she's a little bit smaller, of course, like not a traditional, like bigger center, but kind of more of that athletic, like taller, like forward center. And I think that just kind of reminds me of players like Brianna Stewart who can, operate really well in the post and play that role when their teams need it, but also can operate, outside of that and can shoot. And she's been working on her shot and facilitating and stuff like that. So hopefully her development kind of goes in that direction. She starts to look like that more all around player. And she could end up being, a great asset for the team.
Yeah, I'm certainly looking forward to seeing how her game develops. If it's anything like Stewie's, I think our program's in a really good spot.
Yeah,
That's exactly what we need. I think for me, like, I just want to see how Cass Prosper continues to grow. She has the physique, I think, to do a lot of things. She can guard a lot of positions. That's always a really good spot to start from. And for me, I'm just like, you know what? Which direction are you going to focus on in terms of like, you become more of a 3-and-D? You know what I mean? I think you do have, I don't know. I think she has like a lot of potential. And I think probably as a small forward, like ideally probably a 3-and-D, but we'll see. I don't want to put a limit on her ceiling. She does look pretty dynamic when she does have the ball too, to do a little bit more than just like catching and shooting. Maybe put it on the floor a little bit too. But again, these are such young players, and who knows where they'll be in 4 years. But I'm certainly intrigued after watching these Olympics.
I'm looking at Cheyenne Day Wilson, another sleeper that I think Cheyenne is. I think we talked about individually what we were looking for at the guard spot. I think the shot making ability. She's going into her last season at LSU, right? So that's someone that's going to get accustomed to playing with a lot of pressure, right? So I think, like, in terms of her development, I think that's something that we can monitor closely and see how we can translate in another high pressure environment, which is the Olympics, right? So that's really somebody that we'll be looking at. Playing for Kim Mulkey, it gives you a bit of fire going into the end of your college year and moving into your professional career for sure.
Coach O, I got another question here for you. Just kind of as one of the things they talk a lot about when we're talking about the Olympics, and you hear it on the broadcast, how are people adjusting to the FIBA game? We talk lots about the 5 fouls and how big of a transition that is. From like a national team perspective and a coaching perspective, is there a way to kind of get these men and women who are so committed to playing for their pro teams? Is there a way to kind of prepare them better for playing in the FIBA environment?
I think it's just hard because the windows are so small, right, for preparation.
I think your best bet is to play in an environment that simulates the Olympic environment, right? So that's why, like, if you're looking at on the women's side, besides the besides the shot clock, when they go play in college, that's probably one of the best ways for them to get ready. And you're looking at the NCAA on the men's side. Um, NCAA on the men's side is the only league in the world that doesn't play with 4 quarters, right? So, I mean, that's already like at a disadvantage. So you have the learning curve just keeps on changing. But um, I think the more that we put emphasis on our grassroots, just learning how to play the game, that helps. Obviously, the NBA is a different kind of game and whatnot. And, I just mentioned college. So I think just being able to constantly educate our athletes, the differences and how to play, and just teaching them how to learn spacing, moving the ball, and that kind of stuff. I think it's something that pays a lot of dividends for sure.
It's really interesting how big of an impact fouls have when you compare like the NBA game to the FIBA game. I can't tell you. There's maybe been like 3 games in the past like Raptors season where I even thought about somebody maybe fouling out. And what I mean, of course, sometimes there's the end of game. You're fouling to try and extend the game. That's a little bit different. But like so rarely do you see players go to the bench with 2 fouls in the first quarter. And I know it's a longer game, so they get an extra foul, but it feels like that one foul makes a pretty huge difference, actually.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me too because I find sometimes in the FIBA game it's more physical and they don't get called for the same things they would get called in the NBA. So it's this weird disconnect between, and I mean the rules are somewhat different. Sometimes they get called for other things, but yeah, it sometimes confuses me because I'm like, it's such more of a physical game. There's less, like touch fouls and stuff like that, and still like fouls end up being such a huge thing. But I think it's because players maybe take more liberty because they know that they could get away with it, they could not. So they're going to take those risks a little bit more in the beginning, and then maybe try and dial back if they get into foul trouble. But it's definitely interesting.
Yeah. I think, what, to what Coach was saying too, it's like, as long as you coach the fundamentals and these players are fundamentally sound, especially with spacing and everything like that, like, you can't get in your heads a little bit too much. Like, at the end of the day, like, it's still a game that's like basically 90%, 95% the same as the NBA game. And things like floor balance, things like spacing, things like, boxing out, all those things are really, really important. I do think, especially, honestly, for both programs on the men's and women's side, it's just like, I would love to see more off-ball shooting becoming like a bigger thing. Like, you look at part of what made Serbia really successful, aside from Jokic, is like they got all those shooters around, and Bogdanovic is able to really spot up, and he's really dangerous. You look at what ultimately was the difference between USA and France, it was the shooting. You know what I mean? And it's like, okay, there's different kinds of shooting. There's KD going one-on-one and hitting that crossover into a pull-up jumper that we've seen a million times. In the Serbia game, that was really cool. And then there's also Steph, and the threat that he carries. So, yeah, I mean, where's the off-ball talent? You know what I mean? Like, if you look for the men's team, for example, it's like there's not, like, I don't know, man. I'm not saying, like, there's not a Brady Heslip, but you know what I mean? Like, that style of player, I think, could really be effective so long as you execute and play right. So yeah, I mean, a couple of things, but I mean, ultimately, yeah, it's about being fundamentally sound.
We talked about naturalizing someone. I mean, Steph Curry did spend some time in Toronto. No, I don't think that's going to happen. Final.
His wife's Canadian. Like, there's got to be, like, come on.
Oh, if he wanted
we're
to
gonna
go
have to
one
wait to
last
try.
film.
We got to get one of the kids, use their dual citizenship to their advantage.
All right,
I like
fair
this.
enough.
We're really looking ahead now.
Yeah, seriously.
Okay, let's do one final look ahead here. Take this wherever you want, men's team, women's team, 3-on-3. But as we kind of sit here in 2024 and we look ahead, do we feel the future is brighter, or was this kind of the big moment for Canada? Will, why don't you start us off there?
Oh, I think the future is brighter. I think, like, the general momentum of basketball and the growth in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of the support, in terms of more leagues popping up, I think that's just going to keep going. Like, I don't think this actually changes any of that. Like, it is always nice to win and win at the highest levels to validate the progress, but you're going to make progress, and that's up to the men and women who actually put time into coaching, the players and sort of what they do in terms of the work they put into it, and all the people around the programs to help support. And yeah, I mean, I think, it's just going to keep going. Like, of course, like, there's going to be generations. You're going to get generational players like a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and you would like to build a great team to like maximize his capabilities in his, in his prime. I mean, he's still going to be 30 next time the Olympics roll out in 2028. I think that's perfectly fine. But yeah, I mean, in terms of like the progress that the sport of basketball has made in Canada, it's basically been on a, same trajectory, and it's basically since like the Raptors came. You know what I mean? Like, maybe it's gone faster and faster with the Raptors being better and better, and WNBA is coming to Toronto as well. That's going to be a huge thing for the national program. But yeah, I mean, basketball is just going to continue to grow, and Canada is always going to have great talent. I mean, like, we're a country of immigrants. Like, we're going to have lots and lots of people from all over the world take place and showcase and represent for the Canadian flag.
Yeah, I agree. I think just the fact that we're seeing more and more of these young stars go into college, go into the league, the fact that, it seems like every year we have someone being drafted like in the first round in both the men's and the women's side, and someone, going pretty early too. And so I think, yeah, we're just on that trajectory. Like Will was saying, the WNBA team is going to be huge for the women's side, and just like showing young people that like that is a possibility for them to go forward. And I think I was saying this a couple of weeks ago, but like I think that WNBA team coming here is just going to show people, not just on the court, but like how many more opportunities there are within basketball. And I think that's just going to grow the whole community even more. I think people don't really realize sometimes that like how much goes into developing basketball talent, and it's not just the players. You need good coaches, you need development people, you need all those different pieces that come together and know the game more and want to study it. And I think just having more visibility in that sense with the WNBA team coming is going to be so important to, just kind of cultivating the next like great minds of basketball, and like that being in Canada. So it's just exciting to see like how we're growing and how much hype there is and how many people are getting into it. And I think from my perspective, like being a woman, I think it's really fun. We're in a fun era where there's so many women who are just like so into the game, whether it's men's, women's, 3-on-3, whatever. And, it's a different, group of community who's going to prioritize different things about the game that they want to see, and different, organizations and different like outreach and stuff like that. So I think, we're at a really good place. It's becoming a more inclusive community. It's becoming a more diverse community. And that's just going to keep growing, and that will only benefit the product on the court.
Just from what I'm seeing, because I coach at the high school level, there's a lot more parents that are willing to invest in basketball now, right? A lot more parents are willing to send their kids and make them go for opportunities away, which was not available pre 2019. And now, just as Chelsea said, like 2026, right? I believe that's when we get our Toronto WNBA team.
Yep.
I mean, you have to wonder. The only question you have to say is you have to wonder how far this could go for sure as a country.
Exciting times, and I'm sure lots more basketball to talk about in the future. Thank you, everybody. It was a lot of fun to have you all on here on Canada's first roundtable, the first time we've ever even had more than one person on. So historic day here on Canada's Court, and hopefully, we'll have lots of more exciting basketball to talk to up until 2028. That's all for this episode of Canada's Court. Thanks for listening.